Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. and today I'm reviewing Point City from Flatout Games. Point City is a 1-to-4 player tableau building game which you're going to be drafting various resources, using them to pay for buildings. But first, before we dive into that, this is a prototype, all rules, components, and all that stuff subject to change, and I'll have a link to the crowdfunding campaign down below. But with that, Point City is a game which you're building up a tableau, and every single turn you're going to be taking 2 cards from this tableau over here, but they must be adjacent to one another. So for example, I can take these 2 cards, and boom, I have these resources that will help me pay for these buildings. But you're like, wait, what buildings are you talking about, Alex? Are they these buildings over here? I'm like, that's an excellent guess, but no. Those are something else entirely. We'll come back to those. In fact, behind these resources over here is where the buildings are. Now, these, because they're already in my hand, are now resources. They are defined. It is what it is. But before you take your turn, at any point before you take your turn, you can go ahead and say, hey, look, this row or column is entirely resources, therefore I want to flip it. Now, you can do that once per turn, and only if the row or column is entirely resources. Generally, this is kind of an early game kind of move. Doesn't happen that much as you play through it. But let's go ahead, take my first turn. I want to go ahead and flip this column, this row of resources into the various buildings. Let's go ahead and flip this around and see what we got. Now we have a bunch of things, and we can go ahead and start the process of trying to think through how we can actually go ahead and build this out. So for example, there is no for example, I can't actually make this work. I can't, at least not right now, although maybe I could. So let's go ahead and do this. I'm going to build a playground over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these 2 cards. I'm going to take this one over here, and then I'm going to use my starting wild to pay for the additional color, getting that orange I need, and now I have a playground in play. From there, you're going to replace those cards with the reverse of whatever they were. So for example, this was a playground, it was a building in other words, so it's going to become a resource. This was a resource, so it will flip and become a building. You're going to fill the rows from top to bottom and left to right whenever you have to make a choice about what goes where, which might matter depending on just how strategic you're getting. These 2 cards are gone, they go in the discard pile, my wild is gone. That might have been a mistake, we'll talk strategy later, but for right now, I just want to show you how that works, and now we have a playground in play. Now, the good news about having a playground in play, this person's going to go ahead and take their turn, they're going to take 2 resources, they're going to start that process. In fact, actually, they're going to prep for the mini golf course, so they're going to take these 2 resources over here, replacing them both with buildings, again, going from left to right. Back to my turn, I now have a green, which is excellent. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take 2 more green, and we're again going to replace those with buildings, because you always swap the type, and then from there, back to their turn, they'll trade these in for the golf course, but again, you take 2 things, and they can't take this. If they had 1 more orange, they could, so you know what, maybe they will. They'll go ahead and take the golf course with this as their first card, then they'll cash in their ingenuity plus their green, plus their orange. They have this orange over here, so their ingenuity counts as an orange, plus another orange, will pay for the green roof over here, and now they're starting their greens as well, because they took 2 buildings, they're going to come out as resources, and that's their turn. Back to my turn over here, I'm going to trade in my green that stays in my tableau, plus 2 other greens, and I'll go ahead and take the pocket park, and I'll also go ahead and pair that up with this one over here, because I'm going to try to buy the mini golf course next turn. Again, you always take adjacent. We're going to replace this with a resource, and replace this with a building, putting those in play. But more importantly, it's time to show you what these do over here. Now that I have this, I will immediately get to take one of these tiles over here. Right now it's set up for a 2-player game, which means there's 10 tiles in play, but the little player aid has you covered as far as how many cards and how to set up the whole thing based on player count. Does an excellent job. But this enters my tableau. We put this off to the side, and now I go ahead and grab one of these, and because I already have a green, I think I'm going to start by grabbing this. This will give me 2 points for every green I have. This one will give me straight up 5 points. This will give me 3 points for every green and orange, which might help as I get the mini golf course, but I'm not yet committed to orange. And there's a bunch of these different options of configurations, including some interesting ones, like this gives you 4 points for every type you're missing. If I build up a tableau of only 1 or 2 types, I might get 12 points for just not going heavily for the other types in the game. I'm going to grab this, and then we continue the process in the puzzle of going back and forth. As you go through the deck, some of the cards are going to start upgrading. Once you get like about halfway through, a little less, a third of the way through, you're going to start seeing level 2 cards that might cost a little bit more, but that's important because you're building up your tableau. They also give you more points, and then when you get to level 3 cards over here, you have more points coming out, more endgame buildings, less of the tableau being built up, because at this point in the game, there's a few over here, but at this point, your tableau should be more built up, and it's more about those points and endgame buildings as much as possible, and that is basically Point City. On your turn, you take 2 cards that are adjacent to one another, whatever they might be. Your buildings you're going to go ahead and pay for and put into play. Resources you're going to be able to utilize to be able to actually pay for those buildings. You'll be slowly building up your tableau so you can more efficiently and more quickly build a variety of buildings as fast as possible in this 1-to-4 player tableau building game called Point City from Flatout Games and distributed by AEG and all that stuff. Which brings us to the review, starting off with ease of play. This is an incredible easy game to actually learn, to pick up, to teach, especially if you're used to game mechanics. The whole game's got a very short rulebook as far as gameplay, setup, setup, configurations. It covers everything you need to know very quickly. Back of the rulebook has everything you need to know for a quick refresher. Player, it has everything you need for the various, player count setup over here. It just tells you what you need as far as the turn summary and the setup for the various player counts, which are the most confusing things, just reshuffling and distributing the deck based on player count. And by the way, you are choosing from a subset of cards. So in this game, you have a bunch of level 1, 2, and 3, and regardless of player count, you're only ever using a subset of those and kind of mixing them together and creating the deck you'll be playing with. As far as what I like, don't like, and as far as playtime, this plays in like 20-30 minutes, depending on player count. And just a little bit at 4 players, so at 4 players, you might be looking at 35, maybe 40, but I'd say consistently in the 20 to 30 minute range is more common. As far as what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking, starting off with what I would like, which is the quick, simple engine building in the game. You're slowly adding cards, you're slowly creating a tableau, you're slowly going to be adding more. Now, when I have this in play, now I can buy a whole variety of cards for a whole lot less than what it would otherwise cost. That process of building up a tableau is the first thing going on. When you combine that with choosing 2 cards that are adjacent to one another, that gives you a puzzle you have to think about as far as what to do, when to do it, as far as how to use one card to pay for the next, when to use your ingenuity starting card, and there are other wilds that will come out later in the game as well. You'll see more wilds that'll pop up as well. You can use them as a wild resource, giving you the flexibility you need to get what you need. It's all about building up that tableau, and in a 20-minute game, you get a decent amount of tableau building in. Combine that with the various tokens you're going to be going, because this is a big part of the game, and you know that you can start building up an engine geared around certain things, but you have to be mindful of the fact that if you don't build any purples, your engine might clog that time you really want that one purple card in play, and no one else is buying it, and it's kind of blocking the things you need. There's a lot to consider here in a small amount of game time, an easily accessible, digestible game, and a decent amount of tableau building and decision making around a very simple aspect. Pick 2 cards, use buildings or resources, get in these extra point scoring tokens because those are essential. A lot of your points are going to come from these tokens if you build the game up right. So you want to be very mindful of thinking through what you're doing and also paying attention to what your opponent's doing. Over here, this player right now is strongly incentivized to get this, which means I have to choose possibly early on whether to grab this and lock myself in because they're already drifting there. So you want to be mindful of what your opponents are doing at the same time as far as how you go through this game. The core strength of Point City is that it's fast, it's easy to teach, and it gives you rewarding tableau building for a very short and accessible game time. As far as what I don't like in the game, first thing is player count. It works really well I have not played the solo mode, first of all. As far as the other player counts, it works really well at 2 and 3. I think 2 is actually my preferred player count, but it works well at 2 and 3. 4 already slows it down a bit, both in adding extra game time without an additional benefit, but also more importantly, when you're looking at the center grid, which should be refilled as you take things, but when you're looking at that center grid, there is a degree of planning around what's out there, seeing that you want the bus stop, you want the tiny home. There's a degree of planning in this game as you think through what you're going to do on your turn and you build towards that. The more players there are, and this is true even at 3 versus 2, which is why I think I prefer 2, but 3 is still manageable. But once you get to 4, things are changing so fast as far as what's taken that it gets harder and harder to realistically say I'm going to plan for what I'm getting. It's usually about taking things in the moment. So it kind of removes that aspect of having a turn or two of thinking through what you're going to do because things are changing more rapidly in the game. So 4 slowed it down a bit for me. It's not a game I would pull out quite as quickly at 4. I think 2 and 3 is where I would pull it out. Secondly is it's not a ton of variability to the game. The main variability is going to come from the distribution of cards, which doesn't feel variable. I mean, despite having a million little buildings here, they're all effectively doing the same thing. They have a different distribution of cost, they're giving you a resource. There's not a lot of things that make it that interesting. So the core puzzle comes down to how you're going to combine the various tokens on display and how you're going to build towards that engine with a degree of planning around the other players. This is a lighter gateway filler game that is giving you a decent amount for what it is, but does cap out as far as the type of game it is. It's lighter, it's easy to play, it's accessible, but it has a lower degree of range of the decision making and the variability to the engine. As far as I can see others not liking, first of all, is it can feel frustrating when you have people take your things. This is a game that even at lower player counts, if you're planning towards things, other people take them. If you don't like that aspect, if you want something a little bit more multiplayer solitaire, this does have enough interaction from the core pool. Even though you're only building out your own separate engines, people will take stuff and win your turns. It might cause you to rethink and go through what you're doing over there. Additionally, there's a random distribution of cards in the game in the sense that you are randomly shuffling up the cards and saying, hey, we're going to pick, for instance, at 2 players, you're going to be removing 27 cards, so you're using 18 out of the cards. You're only using 18, and 27 level 1 cards are not, 27 level 3 cards are not being used. But that also means that something I have seen in the game is sometimes you're playing through it, and you notice that there's a large lack of, let's say, green cards in that particular game, because it happened to be that the random nature of the shuffling meant green cards were less frequent. I've seen it happen in games, and it's been noticeable. It doesn't personally bother me. To me, it's just something you have to plan around as you go through the game. You're like, okay, great, that's the situation that's on the board, I'll deal with it. But if you don't like that random distribution aspect, it might be a little bit frustrating for you. As far as final thoughts on Point City, overall to me this is a very solid game for the target audience and genre, playtime, space, and all the things it's doing. Ultimately for me it is a 3.5 out of 5. It's a good game, I like it, it gives me a fun little engine, and it does so all in a very short accessible playtime. This is an excellent game that falls in the category of having a good game around for when you want that filler, for when you want something in that splendor category, something quick and simple that is enjoyable but not going to take up too much time, too much energy, is good for gateway gamers, all of that. It is again on the lighter side, so take that into account, but if you enjoy games of this nature, I think Point City is doing an excellent job. 3.5 out of 5 for me. As far as other game recommendations, first of all I mentioned Splendor. This is following the same general camp as Splendor. Clearly Splendor inspired to a degree as you build up your tableau, as things become cheaper, but they managed to put their own unique spin on it in a way that makes it very accessible and rewarding in a very different way. Fits into the same camp, but a different game. And then if you like the city building aspect, and if you're looking for something a little bit less abstract, then I recommend Suburbia from Bezier Games. Suburbia gives you a very solid and rewarding engine building game that gives you a tableau, gives you a lot more things to consider, but is a lot more of an actual city as you build it on the table if you're looking for something of that nature. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, I hope you found it helpful, and as always, I hope you have a good one.